Okay, I think I'm live. This is my second attempt at this, so let's hope this one goes better. Welcome back to the Achieve Oxfordshire Facebook page, or if you're listening on the podcast, hello, welcome back. We had taken a little bit of a break after the festive period to just regroup and get our new groups up and running. Which hopefully means there are a lot more of you in this group or listening to the podcast now as well, which is really exciting. We've got lots of new content coming up, but we are always after your ideas. So if you have anything in particular that you want us to cover, please let us know. We are really keen to make sure we're giving you what you want, so do let us know. Today, we're going to talk about comfort eating. It is one of my favourite topics. And I think it's a topic that comes up with clients quite a lot. So we're just going to have a quick chat. Comfort eating or emotional eating, it's a very big topic, and it's not one that we necessarily have time in the course to dive into as much as we would like. It's just not possible. It's so personal to each and every person. So we can't really offer that, but we want to give you a starting point, and you can go on from here and have a look at what it all means to you and where you want to go with it. So this will be pre-recorded. So if you do have any questions, comment them down below and we will get back to them when this has gone live. So let's start off then talking about what comfort eating is. Comfort eating is fairly self-explanatory. It is literally eating to get comfort, usually when we are trying to deal with some kind of negative emotion. So, you've had a really rubbish day, you've had some bad news, work has been really stressful, and then you just turn to some food to get some comfort. Ultimately, that is what we're looking for from that food when we're having that. There's usually quite a bit of shame around comfort eating. We'll come to that a little bit later on. Often, the foods we go for might be typically higher in sugar or fat or salt, and there is a reason for that, and we will talk all about that. Check that my laptop's plugged in and it doesn't cut out halfway through, which would be fun for us. So that is what comfort eating is. Like I said, really self-explanatory. It is using food as a way to cope with a negative emotion. So the big question, is comfort eating a problem? Now we're going to talk more about this, but I wanted to cover it early so you know where we stand. Comfort eating is not a problem. It is a perfectly valid coping mechanism. If it wasn't, none of us would do it. And I don't think I've met a client or a friend or a family member that doesn't comfort eat. So if it didn't work, none of us would use it. So it is perfectly fine if you use comfort eating. It's a little bit more complex than that. We'll talk about it. Essentially, comfort eating is fine. It's a great coping mechanism. The only problem might arise if it is your only coping mechanism. And that would probably be the same with any coping mechanism. If it's the only one you're using, then it doesn't give you much leeway. We want a bit more of a holistic view, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So comfort eating isn't a problem, but a lot of people view it as a problem for themselves. They might feel shame about it, they might feel guilty, they might feel a lack of control around it. And that has to do with usually our relationship with food. So, like I said, the foods that we tend to go for, I'm going to speak for myself. I love a good bit of chocolate, maybe some biscuits, whatever it is. They tend to be less nutritious options because they are foods that often give us comfort, that we might have, we experience or we associate joy, we associate happiness. They taste good. Those foods are pleasurable. That's what we're looking for in those moments when we've got those negative emotions. So one of the things we want to think about is our relationship with food and the language that we use around food. So the last thing we need, for example, you've had a bad day, you've turned to comfort food, The last thing you need on top of that bad day is to start feeling guilty and shameful about the foods that you chose to use for comfort. That's not what we need. Shame on top of a bad day is not going to make your day any better. So, if we can start to change the language that we use around food, it can make a massive difference. Anyone who's been on my courses will be watching this and hopefully smiling because you will recognize this talk very well. But we have a tendency to describe foods as good or bad. You know, oh, I'm not going to have that chocolate because I'm trying to be good today. Or if you have had some cake, you know, oh, I was naughty today, I had some cake. Stop. Stop. It's not a thing. Food is not good or bad. Every food has something to offer. And when we use that language, we start to infer things about ourselves. You know, if we are constantly saying, oh, I'm being bad having this chocolate, things like that, it kind of starts to link in with how we feel about ourselves. And the food we eat in reality doesn't have any effect on whether we are a good or a bad person. You know, unless you stole the food from a crying child, we're probably okay. So if we can start to reframe the way that we look at food, and we see all foods as just simply food, everything has something to offer, everything has place in a balanced diet, then slowly it takes these foods off of their pedestals. So, lost my train of thought. So if we start to see kind of all foods as equal, everything has a place, we start to stop feeling shameful if we have had some chocolate. A big part of this, and it's not easy work, it's a long process, so don't beat yourself up if this takes a good while. A big part of this process is having your comfort foods in your day-to-day lives and not only having them when you are looking for comfort. That's because, again, if you've been on the course, you'll know that we talk about the diet cycle. So if we know that a food is always available to us if we want it, it becomes less appealing and less tempting. If, however, if I have chocolate when I am looking for comfort, but I don't allow myself to have chocolate any other time, eventually I can only go so long not allowing myself to have any chocolate because I enjoy chocolate and I like it and it can be part of a healthy, balanced diet. Eventually, all I'm going to start thinking about is when I can get my hands on that chocolate. Then finally, I can only take that restriction for so long, and it is a restriction. Eventually, I will binge and I will have more chocolate than I planned. I will eat it quicker than I can enjoy it, and it just won't be a very pleasurable experience. But if we have it available all the time and we're giving ourselves not only the physical permission, but the psychological permission to eat those foods when we want, that slowly starts to break us out of that diet cycle because we take those foods off a pedestal. And that means that these foods aren't only associated with those negative feelings, they're not only associated with comfort eating, they're just a part of your diet. Like I said, this is not easy work, it's not quick work, but I promise it's worthwhile. So my biggest tip for you, if we want to start, if you do feel kind of shame or guilt when you've eaten something that you have been deeming as a bad food, the biggest thing to do is to notice when you are describing foods in that way. So you don't have to believe it straight away, but if you notice yourself saying, oh, I'm going to be good today, I'm going to have this, just say to yourself, actually, no food is good or bad, it's just food, and describe it in different ways if you want to. So you could describe it by its food group if you want. You could just describe it by its name, or you could go with texture, flavor, anything like that. But remove that morality from it. It's just not helpful. You don't have to believe it straight away. absolutely don't have to believe it, but language makes a massive difference. And so if you can start to shift the language that you use around food, that will change your relationship with food. And it just means that when we have turned to comfort eating, we are hopefully reducing the likelihood of adding a bit of shame on top of that as well, which is the last thing we need if we're having a bad day. So, up next is building up your comfort toolkit. So, you'll remember that I said at the start, comfort eating isn't a problem. It's a great coping mechanism, it's a very valid one. A lot of us use it. But like I said, the problem may arise if it is the only coping mechanism we have, because there's a lot of situations where, yes, food might give us some comfort, but it might not actually solve the issue that upset us in the first place. So, for example, if I've had a really, really stressful week and I'm looking for food for comfort and relaxation and stress relief, I'm going to get that temporarily, and that's good. But long term, that food isn't doing anything to kind of prioritize my workload and make it more manageable. So that's why we want to have multiple coping mechanisms in place. Because, I need to sit down and go through my calendar and sort things out so that actually the root cause of that problem, the root cause that is making me comfort eat in that particular situation, also needs to be dealt with. So, what I would like you to do after you've watched this video is write a lovely long list of all the things that bring you comfort, bring you joy, bring you happiness, whatever it is, make you feel good. Write them all down. So some of them will be kind of potentially obvious ones. Speaking to a friend, talking things through with someone, listening to your favourite music, watching your favourite film, getting outside for some fresh air, whatever it might be. You might also have some, what should we call them? practical self-care things that you might need to do. So thinking back to that example of a stressful workload, I might need to actually sit down and go through my schedule. You might want to, tidy your kitchen because that makes you feel less anxious, or you feel, tidy home, tidy mind, that kind of thing. Your list will be different from everyone else that you know. And really importantly, food should be included on your list. Like I said, it's a completely valid coping mechanism. The goal of this exercise is not to stop comfort eating completely. That's not needed, it's not necessary. But what this list will mean is that when you are having a bad day, you have options. And it gives you, when you're having a bad day, it's sometimes hard to think rationally or hard to think beyond what we're used to. So if we're very used to comfort eating and that's one of our only coping mechanisms, in the moment when you're having a bad day, it's hard to think of the other things that will make you feel better in that moment. But if you've already got that list, you can refer to it and you can try out a few options depending on how you're feeling, and you can see which ones work for you in which situations. It's all about getting to know yourself more and being really curious with it. So that is your homework. I bet you weren't expecting that to be sent away with work from this little video, but it is a really valuable tool. Please do give it a go. And if you want to share any of the things that you do to bring you comfort, please do pop them in the comments below. We would love to see them. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about then was understanding our emotions. It's a big part, like we said, comfort eating. We are usually trying to cope with often a negative emotion. So like we said, anxiety, stress, sadness, whatever it might be. A big part of helping ourselves is understanding what the emotion is that we're feeling. Sometimes we use food to kind of mask what the emotion is, and we don't fully recognize it and we don't fully deal with it. So if you've heard of something called the Wheel of Emotions, that can be really, really helpful. If you haven't heard of it, just give it a Google. There's lots of different ones, but they're all fairly similar. And essentially, it starts in the middle with some core emotions that we can all recognize fairly easily. I can't remember them off the top of my head. I should have looked, shouldn't I? But things like happiness, sadness, anger, things that we all can recognize in ourselves fairly easily. And then they each start to branch out and they get more specific. And you can kind of look at which one do you think you recognize. Then you can look at the next step. Okay, some more detail. Which one do you recognize there? And so on and so on. And it really helps us narrow down exactly how we're feeling. Because if we can narrow down exactly how we're feeling, we might be able to determine which of our coping mechanisms would be most appropriate for us in that particular situation. So it's a little bit of, experimental trial and error to find out what works for you in certain situations and what doesn't. And that's okay. Give yourself time, give yourself compassion. We will get there. So I better wrap it up before I go on for too long. But those are my kind of key points. So I'll run through them quickly just to sum up. So comfort eating is eating to cope with a negative emotion. And it is not a problem. It is a perfectly valid coping mechanism. We do need to look at our relationship with food. Often with comfort eating, sometimes there's added shame on top because of the foods that you've chosen and the way that you feel about those foods. So if we can change that relationship, it means that we can get rid of that shame on top. And in general, having a good relationship with food has so many benefits for your wider life as well. So yeah, do have a look into the idea of reframing food not as good and bad, just as food. If anyone's interested, it's kind of called food neutrality, if you want to have a Google, if that sounds like something you're interested in. And then build up your comfort toolkit. So like I said, comfort eating is not a problem. Unless it is your only coping mechanism, then it can be. So we want to have lots of different options. So write that list that I was talking about and comment any ideas that you have below. And learning to understand our emotions and what different emotions actually feel like for us can be really helpful as well, to know which coping mechanism will be most appropriate and most helpful in different situations. So that is it. Thank you for listening or watching. Like I said, we are pre-recording this, but if you have any questions at all, comment them below, get in touch with your practitioner if you're on a course, and we'll be more than happy to help you out. So I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you all soon.